Chapter 19. In the Lair of Monsters. To learn the truth behind something you thought you knew, only to face the fact that you knew nothing at all, is perhaps the hardest test of any. My time in Wonder Haven had changed everything. The journey I was now expected to finish was not the same one I had started. I began to think, if I was to tell the Wonderlanders this truth, they wouldn't believe me. They wouldn't understand that the sacrifice of their queen and themselves, for that matter, would save everyone from eternal darkness. I wouldn't be a hero at that point, only someone who spoke absurdity in the face of the hope that my false understanding of the rose had built up. I imagined they would turn from me, casting their hero to the fate he spoke of alone. I decided then that the truth hidden in the fountain must remain a secret between White and I until the end came for us all on equal ground. Where secrets could remain hidden, change could not. It was the theme of this adventure in Wonderland, giving chase in all the places I went, and in all the faces and in the faces of all the creatures I met. Even when I stepped foot in the place between again, all the warnings and talks I had been a part of were there, waiting for me. Whether it was the cherry blossoms that didn't offer the same warm invitation as before, or the wind that carried the sounds of busy frogs scrambling to please their mistress, being non-existent. Something here was very different. In my heart, I knew that reaching the exit and making it back to White's castle was of the most importance. But along the way, I intended to find the cause for this change. So, I backtracked. Through the meadow, down the trail, and over the bridge, all the while seeing no sign of life. That was until I stopped in front of the Duchess's cabin, just in time to watch her struggle to shut the door. It was as if she was fighting someone or something that wanted out, and by the grunts and growls coming from the other side, I would guess something. She fought for quite some time, but finally was able to secure it and turn around. She seemed frantic and frazzled as she took notice of me and offered a greeting. "Oh, Alan, my boy, it's so good to see you," she exclaimed as she rushed to meet me. "If you're here, then it must be safe to assume you've succeeded in getting the rose and are on your way back, yes?" "Yes," I grunted in response, as she wrapped me in a tight and unrelenting hug. The Duchess then began to check me over excitedly. "Well, let me have a look at you. White would never forgive me if I aided you in a way that would get you hurt." She proceeded to pat me down and scan me with her eyes. It wasn't until she reached my back that she froze in a hypnotized admiration of the rose. "And there it is," she said in a whispered gasp. "The crystal rose itself, right before my eyes. It's so close I could reach out and touch it." Before her fingers could make contact with the rose, I acted fast and broke her gaze. "Where are your frog troops, Duchess?" I asked while turning around to face her again. "I dismissed them for a few moments. I suspect they're off doing amphibious things. I don't know," she answered in a careless tone. "And with them gone, who will pepper your grounds?" I fired back. The Duchess seemed pleased at this question, and answered it swiftly. "Such a good lad to worry about me so. But I'm more than capable of controlling myself for a few moments." For some reason, the smile she gave with her reply didn't provide me with comfort. But I didn't argue. "I'm sure you are. I really must be on my way now." Before I could take a single step away from her, she was in front of me, insisting that I stay. "Oh, but you mustn't just yet. Not with how tired you must be. I can see it in your eyes. You're exhausted. You must stay here and rest." "No, I can't," I urged. "The Queen must receive the crystal rose before it's too late." "Then let me take it. Let me be the hero this time. I promise to deliver it straight into her hands without delay. Then you can go home and forget all about this troubled wonderland." I did my best not to get caught in an argument, but it seemed I had no choice. I must be the one who carries it. "You are not part of the royal family, nor have you proven yourself worthy." "A technicality," she argued. "A technicality can't break the bonds of being like family. The Queen and I couldn't be any closer without being blood." "That's not enough," I said as I tried to inch forward. The Duchess became emotional as she pleaded. "Please, Alan, you must understand. We've been caged like animals for so long. I've nearly forgotten what it was like to be me. All I need is one deed to prove to the White Queen that we are suitable for the world outside. What better deed than saving the whole kingdom?" The Duchess's cries for mercy struck a chord with me. I did, in fact, understand how she felt. Being locked away from the rest of the world, being locked away from the rest of the world, forgetting who you used to be. I understood it all. As much as I could relate, however, I needed to stay on task. "I appreciate your willingness to help, and I'm truly very sorry for your circumstances, but I just can't allow that," I said as I physically moved her to the side. As I passed her and began to walk away, something inside her snapped. Her frantic but friendly attitude became sharp and hostile. "You can't allow that," she repeated with a hiss as her back was turned. "If that is your choice, then mine is to not allow you to leave." Surprised, I pressed, "Excuse me?" Suddenly the Duchess whipped around. Her tongue spewed with verbal venom as she scolded me. "You little fool! Did you honestly think that I was just going to let you pass by me with that flower and leave? Especially when just one drop of that nectar would be enough to reverse all the evil that Red unleashed. I could get our home, our lives back. Just the way it was before. That revenge is mine to take and no one else's." "Power," she interrupted. "That's right. With power like that, maybe after destroying the Black Royalty, I could take the throne from White, provide a far better life for my son and I than I could ever dream of. Wonderland would bow at our feet. I like the sound of that. A lot." I could see a menacing look in her eye, and growing bloodlust as she stepped toward me. "I don't want to hurt you, Duchess," I said in the hopes of diffusing her anger. She only smirked and let out an evil chuckle. "Ah, sweet Alan, I don't want to hurt you either, which is why I'm going to give you a simple piece of advice for what's about to happen next. I'm going to snap my fingers, which will summon my son. Now, he will do just about anything for his mother, so, unfortunately, he will have every intention of killing you." She then lifted a hand into the air and snapped her fingers. The sound echoed intensely as it ripped through the air, leaving no tree nor rock around unable to hear it. It was then that she uttered a single word with a malevolent pride that could be matched only by Red herself. "Run." While the word slithered out of her mouth and coiled around me like a snake waiting to strike, I could hear the grunts and growls she was battling with earlier reached deafening levels. Little did I know that this would mark the beginning of what nightmares are made of. The ground began to tremble as the noises became wild and angry. Soon after, a giant being leapt through the roof of the Duchess's cabin, erasing even the slightest notion that it had once stood there. It took a second for me to fully grasp what it was that was coming for me, but once I did, I was frozen in horror. What stood just feet away from me upon landing was not a being at all, but rather an elephant-sized boar, covered in a dark brown hair, with a black mane, with disgusting boil-like growths from head to tail. He proudly displayed tusks that matched his size. If it wasn't enough to scare you, it was raining. Not water like you and I would expect, however, but body parts. Specifically the rotting, dissolving body parts of frogs. The terror continued as limbs and entrails fell all around us. It was awful enough that all the guards were dead, but the question was, why were they dissolving? That's when I noticed the ground around where the boar was standing. It was melting as well. The boar's saliva was acid, eating away everything it came in contact with. There it was, the curse in full swing. Red's dark magic had twisted the consciousness of once good people and made them monsters. Wonderland was filling with them at an alarming rate, and I seemed to be getting challenged by them all. I was in the center of the boar's intense hazel eyes, and as he pawed the ground in preparation to charge, I knew I had to act fast. Amidst the decapitated corpses, I found an acid-chewed spearhead that still had enough handle attached to pick up and throw. I heaved it at the beast, hoping that it still had enough use in it to serve me and wound him. Luckily, my aim was true, and it struck the animal in the shoulder, straight on. To my dismay, however, instead of mortally wounding the creature, it just glanced right off its hide. It became immediately clear that no weapon could pierce the skin, and to stand and fight with the vorpal blade would be hopeless. Taking the Duchess's advice, to run was the only thing left to do. So, as the boar dug his hooves into the ground and started to run me down, I headed straight for the cherry blossom forest. I knew that there was no way I could outrun him, but I had hoped that my ability to easily maneuver through the trees would give me enough of an advantage to gain separation in the chase. What I didn't take into account was his sheer size. While I zigzagged underneath, over, and around trunks, the boar's broadness allowed him to stampede right through them with his massive tusks. And his massive tusks let him uproot entire trees that got in his way. What I was hoping would give him trouble and slow him down was no obstacle at all. Running as fast through the woods as my legs could carry me, I could still feel the beast's hot breath on my heels, and I could hear the sizzle of acid as it drooled onto the ground. I could have very easily been killed in that forest, and in fact, I believe I would have been, had it not been for a me-sized hole in between two thick trunks. There was just enough space between the boar and myself for me to dive through the hole and brace myself on the other side. The beast rammed the trunks head first, and though um, they began to bend and the roots began to give. They held long enough for me to escape. With the boar distracted, I used the time that the trunks had given me to hide. I was able to find what had to be the biggest tree in the entire forest, run up it, and hide a few branches up. High above the ground, I rested my head on the tree as I tried to catch my breath before the boar caught up again. I found myself looking up at the sky and silently praying that I'd be able to keep the crystal rose on my back away from danger. About that time, the creature had trotted his way underneath my tree. He looked small compared to it. I could tell he was confused, having not seen where I had gone, but he could smell my scent in the air. Knowing I couldn't hide up in that tree forever, I decided to do something that you may call suicide. Seeing the boar's back completely exposed below me, I took a leap of faith from my perch and landed on his back. Both startled and angered by my doing this, he began to snort and buck wildly, bashing his body against trees in the hope that he might crush me. When that didn't work, he resorted to galloping back the way we came. Hanging on for dear life, I could feel the power of this animal as we tore through the forest. Out of desperation, when we reached the clearing again, the boar leapt into the air, spinning so that he would catch me between himself and the ground. Before he could trap me, though, I jumped off and away from danger. I rolled away from the boar, coming inches away from a pool of acid. Quickly rising to my feet, I watched as he too collected himself for the next meeting. The monster and I had reached a stalemate that neither of us were content with. I knew the boar wouldn't stop until he had done his mother's bidding and given her the rose, so I had to think of a way to beat him. His hide was like armor, leaving my greatest weapon useless upon initial combat. But wait, there's got to be at least one area that isn't protected by his rock-like skin. Perhaps he's like a turtle, protecting a much softer and penetrable underbelly. At that moment I hatched an idea. To ensure my success, I knelt down and upon unsheathing my sword, dipped the tip in the pool of acid. It began to smoke and melt a little, but I knew it would hold up. Now, with both combatants ready to go, it was time to end this. The boar pawed the ground, lowered his head, and charged at me once more. I too raced to meet him, sword extended and leading the way. This was my chance to outsmart the beast. I knew his move would be to ram and gore me with his tusks, so when he did, I was able to dodge, coming in minimal contact with him. Once I was safely under his chin, I dropped to a knee, sliding blade up. The action caused the boar to be gutted all the way through from throat to tail. I came to my feet again, just in time to see the beast's insides litter the ground where he fell. The air was quick to smell of flesh and blood. The only thing I could hear was the heart-wrenching cries it made to the Duchess as it lay dying. Not wanting to see its suffering linger for another second, I felt the humane thing to do was walk over to him, lift my sword above my head, and plunge it into his eye, ending its misery. As odd as it may be to say, despite the hostility between the beast and I didn't want to have to kill him the way I did. I suppose my remorse was a good thing. My conscience was still a guiding light on the brink of this insanity. It felt right to mourn yet another death, but my moment of grief was nothing compared to the screams of a heartbroken mother. The Duchess came over to where her son lay, and while sobbing hysterically, knelt down and cradled his head in her lap. "How could you, my baby boy?" she yelled as she stroked his head. I had intended for this moment to be my exit, as I backed away from the scene, but it took no time at all for the Duchess to take notice of me and call out vengefully, "You are no different than them, Alan Little. Your heart is black, your soul is black. The crystal rose may have chosen you as its carrier, but let the blood of my innocent son that dries on your sword serve as evidence that it chose wrong. You are not a hero sent to save us. You're just another monster sent to bring us to ruin. You will pay for what you've done here, and that revenge is mine to take." Near the end of her speech, her voice had gone from harsh and gravelly to demonically low as I watched her hate flow freely. Unlike with her son, I was able to witness the full transformation of the curse as she changed from herself into some sort of Wolverine and human hybrid. Out from underneath her dress first spread and covered her entire body. While her pointed nose had morphed into a snout and her mouth into animal-like jaws, she dropped down on all fours. Her body broke and deformed, much like in the way you'd expect a werewolf to change, with creaks, snaps, and cries of pain. What she didn't gain in height from the transformation, she gained in muscle. Her hands became powerful paws, and her nails grew into razor-sharp claws. It was quite horrific to watch. I could see what exactly it was that White was afraid of. The Duchess was no longer the Duchess of Wonderland, with a noble son. She was now the monarch of beasts, the mother of monsters. With her form achieved, the Duchess, if you could still call her that, stood up on her hind legs and stepped over her son's body. She let out a roar and took off running toward me. After a few steps, she took to all fours, gaining speed as she went. Before I knew it, she closed the distance between us and lunged at me. Her power and agility went underestimated, because before I could raise my blade to meet her, she had struck me in the shoulder and ran. Her aim was not to kill me, but to weaken me, make me suffer. I was unable to predict this drive-by tactic, as her next strike found the back of my leg. It wasn't until the third strike that I attempted to counter, but even then, I was too slow to catch her. Taking a blind swing with my blade, I expected her to be in the middle of a lunging attack on my blind side. Instead, I connected only with air, and the Duchess was nowhere to be seen. My heart sank as I realized that just like with her child, this battle was not in my favor. With her breathing being the only audible noise, I concluded that I was being stalked. As hard as I tried to cover all sides in case of an attack, she found a gap in my defense, and with a leap, she clung to my back and was trying to bite my jugular. I'll never forget the feeling of fighting to keep her jaws away from my neck as her hind claws dug violently into my back. The struggle for the upper hand was so fierce that not only did I drop the vorpal blade, but I also lost security over the rose on my back, and it was sent flying. The tussle ended in a pile of rubble that was once the Duchess's cabin. It wasn't until I was able to slam her to the ground and get separation that we took notice of where the rose ended up. The Duchess only took her eyes off me to look at it as it lay there, helpless and undefended. She knew that to get to it, she would have to beat me. She also knew that she held nearly every advantage over me in this fight, so in the blink of an eye, her hind legs propelled her forward in yet another great leap. This time, however, due to what I can only assume to be pure instinct, I was able to tackle her out of the air and force her to the ground. I knew I wouldn't be able to hold her down forever, but I needed to keep her away from the rose as long as possible. I did so successfully until I caught a clawed swipe across the face, which made me forfeit my grip. Panting heavily, she recovered and rose up on her hind legs. As I laid there on my back, searching desperately for the will to continue the fight, it sunk in that she had won. I just couldn't match the power, speed, and agility the Red's curse had given her. The rose was hers to take. Curiously enough, though, she didn't. As she stood there, having every opportunity to take the flower for herself, she didn't. It was almost like, in that moment, she had lost all interest in it. Whether it was out of frustration at the fact that I was still alive, or out of the necessity that I needed to be, I was still the prey in her eye. The Duchess walked toward me slowly, as if savoring the fact that I appeared so helpless. All I could do as a means for escape was crawl inch after inch through the wreckage of her home. Where I struggled, she navigated cleanly and was able to catch me with her slow pace. Still, obviously in no rush to end my life, she lumbered over top of me and placed her front paws on my chest. As I glared into her honey-colored eyes, she opened her mouth, almost hyperextending it as a snake would, while she lowered her teeth closer and closer to my face. This story would have ended there had I not been able to find a small, yet sturdy piece of wood that I used to bash her in the face. This didn't buy me a lot of time, but I was able to crawl frantically away and tumble awkwardly over debris. After a few growls of pain, the Duchess was on my tail again, just as I anticipated. I somehow had managed to make the beast uglier, the scrap of wood having left its fair share of bloody scratches and splinters on her face. Clearly losing patience, she was up on two legs again. This time, instead of maneuvering through the rubble, she used her impressive strength to clear it completely out of her way. As she approached me once more, I was able to unknowingly place a hand on a pepper grinder. Although it was badly damaged, it was the only thing I had with a chance to keep the Duchess at bay. Though I tried with all my might to get the crank on the end to spin, it was just too weathered to be of any use. Instead of inducing fear, it induced laughter. Without saying so, I could tell that she thought this desperation move was pathetic, and with a single swipe from her massive claws, my hope was sent flying into oblivion. Again, the story should have ended there, but luck seemed to favor me heavily. Though I no longer had the grinder itself to protect me, I noticed that its ammo had left a trail upon the ground. With quick thinking, just before the Duchess was about to end me, I threw a handful of pepper into her face. As you might expect, this caused her a great deal of discomfort. Flailing around violently, my actions had caused a horrible sneezing fit to occur. What started out as the demonic-sounding sneezes of a Wolverine-like monster had ended as the miserable-sounding sneezes of a likewise Duchess. With her transformation back to normal complete, I took her disorientation as a time to retrieve my blade and strike. The last sound the Duchess made was a terrified gasp as I cut off her head. Our battle was over, and as her headless body fell in a heap on the ground, so did I, onto my knees. While I worked to collect both myself and the crystal rose, I began to wonder if the Duchess hadn't been right. Maybe I was no different than Red and the Black Royalty. Though I didn't wish it, I had brought death to those who stood in my way. Maybe this was yet another test of the rose, this time to not accept the true end of Wonderland, but rather accept the fact that I wasn't meant to be a hero at all. Maybe Alice and I were always just a means to a necessary end. The blood on my sword was a sign that my war had started without me. Now I go to finish it. That's going to wrap up another episode, guys. I think from here on out, the best course of action would be to stick to one chapter per episode. As you can probably tell, these chapters are getting quite hefty with a lot of choreography and visual and descriptive stuff. So, yeah, I think the best course of action is to just take it slow, take it easy, and kind of coast through the last handful of chapters that we have until the end, and hopefully just enjoy what is left of our journey. So, until next time, guys, we'll see you later.